This is passage 1, and I'm just going to do a brief summary because this passage is really not that hard. First, as always, we always read the blurb. It says, the passage is from Julie Iromuanya. That's my best guess. Mr. and Mrs. Doctor, 2015 by Julie. Iffy has just traveled to Nebraska to join her husband Job, who's been living there since the couple's marriage in Nigeria. I should ask my coworker how to pronounce these names. He's from Nigeria. So it starts off with some dialogue, and in the first paragraph we know that they've got plans. He says, we'll meet other Nigerians at a restaurant, Amika and Gladys, and then presumably this is the husband talking. He's describing their character. You'll like Gladys, she's classical, but Amika, you must become acquainted. The next paragraph, they pretty much just describe the setting, and it looks like they're driving on the road. If you want to mark down some locations, they mention Zanta. That was going to be their new home. Well, above that was Omaha, and here's some information where Job said he went to medical school, so Job is obviously the doctor, and that's where they're meeting them for dinner. Also, something that'll come up later, it says this is also where Job commuted to for work each night. So if we were to annotate this first section, I would just kind of write, initially they're having plans with these two Nigerians. The next one, they're kind of just describe the setting, the background, and we have some personal details. As the passage goes on, the next paragraph continues to talk about the setting. Later, this was the feature that pleased Iffy the most when she stared out the window at night while Job was away at the hospital. So, this kind of reminds you, typical, if you're married to a doctor, you generally don't have, or that person probably doesn't have a lot of time. So this is kind of a hint about their relationship. The next two paragraphs start talking about the weather, and specifically it's snow. And obviously, if these two are from Nigeria, it's going to be a new experience for them. She said she only read of it in books. And from this description in the paragraph, you can tell that this is kind of an emotional, sort of a sentimental experience for her. She said, this is America. She would scoop it into an envelope, mail it to Auntie, and then she kind of laughed to herself. And the funny thing is, it says, Iffy reached over for the door handle, I guess while they're still driving, and Job swerved, and he's like, what are you doing? Are you crazy? So all this kind of suggests to me that there are certain aspects of their relationship that might be negative. I'm kind of just speculating. This is just my own thoughts as I was reading. Maybe because they were separated for a while he was in America and she was still in Nigeria. So she asks to stop the car and touch it, and it says, he gave her a strange look. We cannot be late to dinner. And then she says, darling, settling on the word she had heard Auntie and Uncle use in the middle of quarrels, and then Job gives in. So again, this is more giving hints about their relationship. Again, there is some underlying tension as you read through it. The next paragraph goes and talks about the setting again, and then from line 67 talks about her experience just touching the snow, and she says, or the author says, it was cold and wet like rain. That was all. She felt foolish, because she's being very sentimental and emotional about the snow. It's her first experience. And if you keep reading, it says, at first Job sat in the car, but then he came out, and look what he says at the very end of the paragraph. She shivered when her eyes met his. He said softly, I did that as well. So this is kind of like a relief to the tension that we've been feeling about their relationship. At first, you kind of feel this disconnect between them, but now he's kind of being empathetic towards her. He's saying like, oh, I did the same thing when, I first came here, and I kind of understand you. And the last paragraph basically just talks about her thought process, because, it looks like she just arrived in America. She says, it suddenly occurred to her, I can do anything here, and I can be anything like you, she said. I can be a doctor in America if I like. So this is, in general, a very emotional experience for her, a lot of new things for her moving to the US, and that's basically what the passage is about. Question 1, it can be inferred from the passage that Job regards Iffy's first meeting with his friends with. Now, if you remember, he did express some concern in the very beginning in the first paragraph. So if you remember that, you might want to look over the answers. You might be able to get it. But let's take a look real quick first. All right, notice what he says. He says, we'll meet the other Nigerians at the restaurant, Amika and Gladys. You'll like them. That's positive. He paused for a moment. You will like Gladys immediately. She's a classical lady. But Amika, you must become acquainted with before you can understand his foolish humor. So positive about Gladys, a little bit negative about Amika, but he says you'll like both of them, and apparently he's friends with both of them. So let's look at the answers. Choice A, concerned that Amika will not make a good first impression. So yes, that's certainly what he meant when he says about Amika's foolish humor. B, hope that Iffy will enjoy food at the restaurant. So nothing in that paragraph about the food, and nothing really in the rest of the passage about food. Typically, the early questions tend to deal with the beginning of the passage, and they go in order, but not always. Choice C, doubt that Gladys and Amika will have anything in common with Iffy. He doesn't really say that. He says you'll like them both, and especially Gladys. So in general, it's more positive than negative, besides that one negative comment about Amika. D, inattention to Iffy's own reluctance for such a meeting. So I don't think there's anywhere in the passage that suggested that Iffy was reluctant, which means unwilling to meet his friends. Again, you do get some tension reading throughout, but nothing that specifically said that Iffy really didn't want to do such a meeting. So all that means is that A is going to be the best answer. Question 2, passage describes a previous weather event as affecting Job by. So no real clue as to where the answer is. The answer is actually at the end of the second paragraph, so we can take a look at it. The other possibility would have been the whole discussion about snow, and so we'll keep that in mind as well when we look at the answers. But basically it starts at around line 18. So it says, this was also where Job commuted to for work each night. Zonta, Nebraska was a town whose name meant trusted flat waters. The Indians had named it that. One year, he said, in the middle of winter, there were several hot days and it all melted. River drained into street, Job said, thrusting one finger along the skyline. I guess that looks something like that, I think, or maybe down, I'm not sure. He had finally understood what the name meant. So trusted flat waters, I guess that's talking about all the melted snow. So when we look at the answer choices, choice A, showing him how the region's climate can be unpredictable. Maybe. I don't know how predictable it is for there to be a hot day in the winter, so possibly. B, leading him to recognize the aptness of a particular name. So that actually does work because the line specifically says, in line 26, he finally understood what the name meant. So this would be direct evidence for choice B as far as the SAT is concerned. So B is definitely better than A. C, indicating that his assumptions about snow were groundless. Again, we would need more evidence that he assumed snow was one way, meaning to say if he assumed that it would never melt in the winter and then it suddenly melted, then that would make his assumptions groundless. Groundless means his assumptions were unjustified, but we really don't get that sense from reading that part or anywhere else in the passage. Choice D, disrupting his daily commute to Omaha temporarily. I don't think it said anything about him not being able to get to his job in that paragraph. So all that means is that D is going to be out and B is our best choice. Question 3, one purpose of lines 31 to 34 is to, so since they're giving us the line reference, I like to just look back at it before I even look at the answers because I don't want the answers to influence what I'm thinking. So let's take a look. And so you have to kind of start right over here in line 30. Overnight, there would be such a freeze that from a distance, the trees would look like silver, obviously because there would be ice on the tree, because you know how it shines. Later, this was the feature that pleased Iffy most when she stared out the window at night while Job was away at the hospital. So this was a sentence that we looked at before, something that Iffy admired about the setting while Job was away at the hospital. And I would say that's probably kind of the purpose of it. So let's look at what the answers say. A, demonstrate Iffy's increasing appreciation of nature. So I'd say increasing kind of throws this off. We don't really get the sense that she started to appreciate nature and then appreciated it more and then more after that. Let's see what else the answers say. Contrast Iffy's past with her present situation. Maybe it'd be kind of a stretch. Again, I think the main point is just to say like, hey, when her husband was away, this is what she liked and this is what she enjoyed when she was by herself. Choice C, provide a glimpse into Iffy and Job's future life together. Yeah, so again, in terms of time, the sentence definitely was making reference to the future because it says later, and that's the key word. This was the feature that pleased Iffy most when she stared out the window while Job was at the hospital. So this is going to be in the future compared to what's going on right now. So C looks like the best answer. D, hint at Iffy's growing uneasiness about her husband. I'd say it's a little bit of a stretch. I would not go that far. I mean, like I said, you might speculate that there could be some tension given that she's by herself, he's going to the hospital, but there's nothing that's strong enough evidence that would support D, at least by the SAT standards. So all that means is that C is going to be the safest answer. Question 4, the description of the snowflake's defiance in line 38 serves 2. So let's look at that before we look at the answers. You can start at the beginning of the paragraph in line 35. Dusk melted into a chalk white that floated and exploded into the sky. Job clicked the wipers. So this tells me right here that it's snowing. The first sentence was kind of vague. And they flipped back and forth at a frenetic pace, splitting the flakes. In defiance, this is obviously talking about the flakes, grew fatter and rimmed the windshield with dust that scattered on the wind. So all this to me is saying that there's probably pretty heavy snowfall. Like the wipers are going pretty quickly and then the snow is defying it and growing fatter. So if you ever drive down the road on a winter night while it's snowing, that can definitely happen. So let's look at what it says. So in our own minds when we're thinking like the description of the snowflake's defiance, what does it serve to do? In my mind, it's personifying the snow. It's just saying that it was snowing very heavily. That's as far as I go, as far as the SAT goes. Choice A, emphasize the growing power of the storm. So I think that's okay. Again, it's sort of like the snowflakes fighting against the windshield wipers, so we'll keep it. Imply that the storm will prove dangerous. I think that's going a little bit too far. I would not say there is an implication of danger just from the word defiance. Remember, it's the defiance of the snowflakes against the windshield wipers. So dangerous, going too far. Choice C, suggests that overcoming the storm requires technology. So yeah, this is one of those questions. There was one of those answers in the SAT where it's like, okay, factually it's true, but when the question's asking the description of the snowflake's defiance serves primarily to, that's asking about purpose. It's like saying, why did the author use that word to describe the snowflakes? And the purpose of that word is not to suggest that that overcoming the storm requires technology, even though it might be true. So C is definitely out. D, underscore the quiet beauty of the storm. Underscore basically means to underline or emphasize in a more figurative sense. And yeah, maybe the beauty or maybe the storm was quiet, was beautiful, but that's not really the sense that we get from the word defiance. If anything, I'm thinking it might have been like kind of a menace. So D is going to be out and A is the right answer. Question 5, according to the passage, when the snow begins to fall. So let's glance through the answers real quick. Job stops the car in anticipation of worsening conditions. So this does not happen immediately. This happens after Iffy asks him to do that. And if you go over quickly the passage, you'll remember that part where she kind of insists. Choice B, Job is concerned that the snow will delay their arrival. You might have been thrown off by this answer. There was a part where he was concerned. That's right over here where she asks in line 52 to stop. He gave her a strange look. We cannot be late to dinner. But this happens kind of after, or it seems like a little bit after the snow starts to fall. So this is actually not going to be the right answer because it doesn't happen immediately. But we'll hold it for now. Choice C, if he realizes that the snow is potentially dangerous. Again, no evidence for that whatsoever. If there's something that you guys saw that suggested that, please comment below and we can talk about it. Choice D, if he does not immediately recognize what it actually is. So yeah, this was backed up in the passage. Let's take a look. Starting line 41, she says, snow. If he said, as it slowly dawned on her, meaning to say the idea or the realization that it was snow, she kind of realized it. And it said she had only read of it in books. And then she said, this is America. She would scoop it into an envelope. So again, backing up the idea that this is a new experience for her. So all that means is that D is the better answer than B, because D happens before B. She doesn't ask to stop the car until after that realization in her mind. Questions 6 and 7 should be done together. So let's look at the answers for 6 first without looking at the evidence. After Iffy asked Job to stop the car, Job's feelings toward Iffy shift from, so if you remember, they generally go from more, I'd say, negative to positive. That might be a little bit extreme, but first you're like, you remember he was like concerned about them being late, and then he kind of empathizes with her from reading it. So very quickly, defensiveness to a realization of emotional security. Again, emotional security, probably not. Emotional security is like you're secure in your relationship and you don't fear that anything bad is going to happen. Choice B, dismissiveness to a respect for an unusual ambition. I'd say an unusual ambition kind of throws this off. I don't really think she had an unusual ambition, or anybody did in the passage. Choice C, puzzlement to a recognition of emotional kinship. So emotional kinship is like, you share something, your kin or like your family members. So C seems like it'll work. D, hostility to a powerful surge of genuine affection. D is also going from negative to positive. It's more extreme than C, I think a little bit too extreme, but C and D are the closest. In conjunction with line 54, he gave blah, blah, blah. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So in our minds, when we're doing this, we want to think, how did Job's reactions change? And was it more puzzlement to kinship or hostility to affection? So how extreme was it as we're looking at these choices? So first we got to look at line 54, because I guess that's what's saying that's his initial reaction. So line 52, she says, let's stop, I'd like to touch it. He gave her a strange look. We cannot be late. So again, strange look is kind of like he's probably confused. That's the sense that I get. Again, that does go closer with C as opposed to hostility. So right now, I'd say I would lean more towards C at this point. But let's look at the evidence. Now we're probably looking at the second emotion, or how it changed. 60 to 61 starts with they. They pulled off the road and parked in a clearing surrounded by a twisted metal piping fence. So nothing in here about his reaction towards her. So not related. Choice B, 71 to 73. At first, he sat in the car, wiping away the fog on the inside of the windshield. Then he came out, his back against the car as she rose from the snow. So this is at least related. It talks about him first sitting in the car, then he came out. Not really much about his emotions, though. B, certainly better than A, but let's see if there's anything better. 76 to 77. When her eyes met his, he said softly, I did that as well. So this is, again, her touching the snow. And so looking at the answers, is it genuine affection or is it emotional kinship? Again, I'd say so far emotional kinship is looking better. So choice C is better than D. And right now choice C for number 7 also looks like the best. Let's just check choice D, 82 to 84. When he looked at her again with a queer expression, she elaborated, I can be anything like you. She said, I can be a doctor in America if I like. So this is more focused on her. The only thing that talks about his perspective is that he looked at her with a queer expression. So the queer expression part might actually back up choice B, an unusual ambition. But again, I'm not really sure that he's giving her a queer expression because of what she's saying or because of what's going on. But regardless, C is going to be the best choice out of all of them. So we'll go with C for number 6. And then also C for number 7. Question 8 and 9 should also be done together. It says, which statement can be reasonably inferred from the passage regarding Iffy's relationship to her family in Nigeria? So again, on the SAT, when they do inference questions, they're kind of like inference questions, but you still need good evidence to back it up, because otherwise these types of questions wouldn't be fair on the test. So let's glance through them real quick before we look at question 9. If he regrets that her family could not accompany her, I don't think there was any evidence or any talk about her family following her. So right now we'll say no. B, if he's embarrassed about her family's limited experience with other cultures, again, I don't remember anything about that. C, if he resents the fact that her family did not approve of her marriage to Job, I also don't think so. D, if he respects some family members as models of appropriate behavior in personal interactions. You might not remember D. So again, if D is like what is going on, then you might have said, well, none of these work. And if you're in that situation, then you kind of just have to go through each answer choice. If you do remember D, there was one part in the passage that suggested that, but regardless, we'll have to go through the evidence anyway. As we're going through the evidence, just keep in mind, we're looking for information regarding Iffy's relationship to her family in Nigeria. So you want to keep that question in your mind. What's Iffy's, what can we guess about her relationship to her family? All right, what can we guess about her relationship to her family? That's all you're keeping in mind. So let's go back. And since none of the answers make sense, you don't have to keep any of them in your head. Choice A, lines 44 to 45. She would scoop it into an envelope and mail it to Auntie. So this is her talking about the snow that she wants to show to Auntie. So yeah, we are talking about her family. Does that mean that she regrets that her family could not accompany her? I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but I think that one might go along with A. So just to keep it in mind, we can say A up here goes with A down there. Embarrassed about her family's limited experience with other cultures. This is about snow, not culture. Resents that her family did not approve of her marriage. Nothing to do with that. And personal behavior in interactions. Nothing to do with that. Choice B is right here. It says, instead, she would take a picture for her little cousins. So I'd say B is kind of like A. Again, it's not exactly an expression of regret that her cousins are not there. So, one thing to think about is if both choices A and B seem to go along with A and number 8, neither of them are probably the right answer. Let's keep going. 56 to 57. So here's the situation. She asks to stop on the road and look. He gave her a strange look. We cannot be late. She says, darling, if he said, settling on the word she had heard auntie and uncle use in the middle of quarrels. And then he says, look at the effect that it has on him. He's like, okay, he said, we will stop. So whatever, emotional impact using the word darling to her husband had, clearly he responded and he knew what she was saying. So maybe it was her way of saying, darling, please, or maybe it's like, darling, like, you better do this or I'm going to get pissed. I don't know enough about their relationship. So again, choice C does go along with choice D. If he respects some family members as models of appropriate behavior in personal interactions, because she was basically doing the same thing and it got the same effect. So D up here goes along with C down there. And then let's check the last one, 58 to 59. This is Job. He says, okay, he said, we will stop. We are not far from home. So this is basically just Job giving in to his wife. Doesn't really back up any of the answers, or it's not something that you can infer about her relationship to her family in Nigeria, at least not as well as choice C. So that means we're going to go with choice D for 8 and C for 9. Question 10, the description of Iffy's eyes as large and bright serves to emphasize what? So it's always nice when they give you a specific line reference. So, with these, I just go straight back before I even look at the answer choices. So in the last paragraph, keep in mind what's going on, right? She just had the snow in her hands. This is a new experience for her. Look how they describe it. It melted and ran along her palms and evaporated into the white at her feet. So it's kind of like this magical moment for her. She says, line 80, again, she looked at him and it suddenly occurred to her, I can do anything here. She said, her eyes large and bright. And then she says again, I can be anything like you. I can be a doctor. So when she says, I can do anything, her eyes large and bright, you get this kind of image in your mind of maybe it could be like a child full of hope and wonder, or it could be a very mature thing. Like, she's very optimistic and she's suddenly filled with all these possibilities. However you take it, it is very positive. So let's look at the answers. Choice A, eager anticipation of the adventures that lie ahead. Yeah, I think that makes sense. She's saying she can be anything here, so let's keep that. B, feelings of apprehension. Apprehension is fear, definitely not. C, fierce determination to adopt a new value system. So a new value system would be like changing her beliefs, changing her values, changing what's important to her. We don't get that from the description of her eyes large and bright. The description of her eyes large and bright is more just like happiness, wonder, hope. That's what I would say. joy at being reunited with Job after so many years. So this might be true. She might be very joyful. That might be part of what's going on there. But given the way that paragraph focuses just on what she's thinking as her possibilities, it's less likely that it's about, those words are specifically about Job. That's less likely than it is that those words are about, her anticipation of the adventures. So A is going to be the best answer for choice 10.